The bells reached her before the horses did. The Tipton St. Mary Lane lay empty in both directions when Catherine turned, empty and darkening fast, and suddenly full of a sound no one who had grown up near coaching roads could mistake. A carriage harness in full panic, the hollow thunder of iron wheels on a rutted track. Something going far too fast, with no one calling it back. She was 24 years old, and she had spent 5 of those years learning exactly what she was to this village. The schoolmistress, the vicar's daughter, the woman Edmund Wallace had walked away from at the church door on the morning after her father's funeral, when the parish accounts came up empty, and she came up inconvenient. He had married a wealthier woman 3 weeks later. Tipton St. Mary had nodded and said it was a shame and moved on. Catherine had moved on too. She ran the charity school her father had built in 2 rooms off the high street. She mended her own gloves. She kept her head down and her opinions to herself, and she asked no one ever for anything she had not earned. She was, by all accounts, useful. She was not, in any account anyone had written of her, remarkable. But she could still stop a horse. She stepped into the middle of the road. The carriage came around the bend at a full gallop. 2 horses with their traces swinging loose and their eyes showing white. No driver on the box. The reins streaming free behind them like dark ribbons in the wind. There was no one in control of anything. Catherine raised both arms. She felt the fear then, cold and honest and completely real, the kind that settles into the chest before the mind has finished deciding. Her heart slammed. Her boots were already sinking in the autumn mud. Every sensible thing in her said to press herself into the hedge and let the carriage past. She held her ground. When the lead horse was 10 yards away, she did not close her eyes. She stepped forward and caught the bridle with both hands, bare palms on rough leather. The impact went through her like a wave breaking. The horse's power transferred up through her arms and into her shoulders and her chest all at once, and then she was moving, dragged, both feet cutting furrows through the mud of the lane. And she did not let go. She clenched her jaw and held on through 5 yards and then 5 more, her palms burning where the leather bit in, her boots throwing up arcs of wet clay, the hawthorn hedge streaking past on her left in a blur. The horse slowed, gradually, then all at once. The carriage lurched sideways into the verge with a crash of springs and settled at a crooked angle. One wheel sunk into the drainage ditch by the hedge. The door swung open and banged against the frame. Catherine let go of the bridle. She stood in the lane and breathed. Her palms were bleeding. She could feel the specific heat of it, the sting spreading across both hands. Her grey dress was ruined to the knee with autumn mud. Every muscle from her wrist to her shoulders was already telling her what tomorrow would feel like. The horse trembled under her loosened grip. Slowly the lane settled back into silence. She thought she heard something from inside the carriage. Then a voice came from the window, small, precise, and carrying the particular steadiness of a child who had made a decision not to cry. "Father is asleep on the floor." Catherine crossed to the door in 3 strides. The man was on the floor of the carriage interior, lying completely still. He was tall, she could see that even horizontal, and broad across the shoulders, dressed in a plain dark travelling coat with no crest, no livery, nothing to identify him. His face was turned away from her. A dark stain was spreading from his ribs where he had struck something during the crash, and his breathing was shallow and irregular in the way that made the back of her neck go cold. A girl sat on the seat above him, perhaps 8 years old, her dark hair loose around her face. Her hands were folded in her lap with enormous deliberateness. Beside her, a smaller boy, 6, perhaps, maybe less, had pressed himself against her shoulder and was watching Catherine with eyes that had gone very wide and very dark. The girl did not say anything else. She simply looked at Catherine with an expression that was, in itself, a question. Catherine looked at the man on the floor. She looked at the empty lane. She looked at the light that was failing in the west, and the long walk back to the village, and the 2 children waiting for her to be someone useful. She had no idea who he was. It did not at that moment feel like the most important question. "I can help him," she said. She did not yet know if it was true. "I need you both to be very brave for me." The girl gave a single small nod. That was enough. They managed it with the stable hand's help. The man was heavy, heavier than Catherine had expected, and it took 3 of them to get him off the carriage floor and across the inn yard and onto a proper surface. The innkeeper, Mr. Finch, held a lantern, and looked at the dark stain on the plain coat with the expression of a man calculating inconvenience. "County Hospital at Ashbourne," he said. "That is the sensible thing. I can send a cart at first light." Catherine was already kneeling beside the man, her fingers pressed to his ribs with the flat precision of someone who had done this before. She pressed twice, shifted her hands, pressed again. She felt the give that was not supposed to be there. "He will not survive the road," she said. Mr. Finch frowned. "Miss Lyle." "The rib is cracked and it has shifted," she said. "If you put him in a cart over 3 miles of this lane in October, I will be dressing a corpse by morning, not a patient." She sat back on her heels. "He stays in the village. He will stay with me." The innkeeper looked at the children, who were sitting on a bench by the wall with their nurse bag between them. The girl had not spoken since the lane. The boy had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "Miss Lyle," Mr. Finch said, with a slightly different tone. "I am not sure, that is—" "No one is asking you to be sure of anything," Catherine said. She stood up. "I need 2 men to carry him and a lantern for the walk. That is all I am asking." She got both. The cottage had 2 rooms, and had always been enough. Catherine had lived here for 5 years, since her father's death, since the parish had been kind enough to let her stay in the building attached to the charity school he had spent his life running. The kitchen sitting room held everything necessary: the fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, the shelf of medical texts she had inherited from her father, along with the building and the school and nothing else. Her bedroom held a narrow bed and a wardrobe, and the memory of a life that had been going to go differently. The smaller room was not large enough for a man of his size. She put him in her bed. She built up the fire. She heated water and washed the wound properly and bound it tight, layer over layer, the way the text said, and the way she had learned through necessity was right. The man did not wake. His breathing steadied a little once the binding was in place, which was the sign she had been watching for. The children slept in the kitchen, the girl in Catherine's reading chair with a blanket around her, the boy on the hearthrug with his nurse bag as a pillow. In the small hours, alone in the thin light of a single candle, Catherine allowed herself to think about what she had done. She was 24. She was the woman this village had decided was a cautionary tale. She had no family and no one to call on, and a stipend from the parish that had never, in 5 years, gone further than it needed to. She had 1 dress that was not mended, and it was currently soaking in the wash basin. She had an unconscious stranger in her bed, and 2 sleeping children in her kitchen, and no idea what any of it would look like in the morning. She thought about Edmund Wallace. She could not help it. She rarely could when she found herself at the outer edges of her own resources. He had stood at the church door in his good coat, and he had looked at her with a kind of practised regret, and said that the circumstances had changed, the accounts had come up short. He was very sorry, but he had to think of his future. 3 weeks later she had heard the bells from St. Matthew's, not the charity school's chapel, not her father's chapel, and known who was being married. She had not cried. She had graded copybooks. That had been 5 years ago. She was still grading copybooks. The fire crackled. The man's breathing was slower now, more regular. She checked the binding again, and it held, and she thought, "All right, whatever you are, whoever you are, you will live through the night." She did not know then what it would cost her that he did. She went to Bingham before dawn. Not because she needed to be told what to do. She knew what to do. She had known at the inn yard. But because there were things she could not compound herself, and she did not intend to make do when she did not have to. She knocked at the apothecary's side door at first light, before the shop had opened, and when Mr. Bingham appeared in his dressing gown with the expression of a man who had expected no one, she told him what she needed. "Willow bark," she said, "the strongest preparation you have, and yarrow, the dried leaf, not the tincture. And I need compound of elder root if you have it already made, and if you do not, I will take the raw bark and compound it myself." Bingham looked at her. "The wound," she said, because he was still looking, "is a displaced rib, second from the bottom on the right side. He struck something during the accident. I suspect the mounting iron on the carriage door. The displacement is significant. Fever will come on the 2nd or 3rd day if we do not head it off, and if it does come on it will be chest fever, which will kill him. The bark is for the fever. The yarrow is for the wound site. The elder root is for the inflammation in the tissue around the displacement." She paused. "Do you have all 3? Bingham had not moved. He was a practical man, and a good apothecary, and he had been in Tipton St. Mary for 22 years. He had known Catherine's father. He had watched Catherine run the charity school with quiet competence for 5 years, and he had, like everyone else in the village, formed a settled and unremarkable picture of what she was. He was looking at her now with a very different expression. "Where did you learn the elder root application for rib displacement?" he said. "My father's medical texts," Catherine said, "and Dr. Pelling's lectures, which he attended in 1818 and took full notes on, and which I have been reading since I was 16. Do you have the compound or not?" Bingham went to get the compound. He returned with it, and with the bark and the yarrow, and with one additional preparation she had not asked for, which was a solution of iodine in the specific concentration that was correct for the wound stage she had described. He set everything on the counter. He charged her the parish rate, not the full rate, which was his way of saying something he was not going to say out loud. "If the fever turns bad," he said, as she was leaving, "you will tell me." "The fever will not turn bad," Catherine said. She believed it. That was the most frightening thing. She believed it with the calm certainty of someone who has enough knowledge to know the difference between confidence and luck, and knows which one she's working with. She walked back through the empty morning streets to the cottage and her patient. She did not learn who he was until the second day. Mr. Bingham came at noon, ostensibly to check on the wound. He came through the kitchen door, nodded to the children. The girl was reading one of Catherine's school books with the focused expression of someone managing a difficult situation through the application of industry. The boy was eating bread and looking at Catherine's dried herb bundles with the careful attention of a small scientist. And then he went into the bedroom alone for 5 minutes. When he came back out, he closed the door behind him very carefully. He looked at Catherine for a long moment. "Miss Lyle," he said, "your patient is James Alderton, the Duke of Marchmont." There was a silence in the kitchen. Outside, a cart went past on the high street. Henry looked up at Bingham with large, interested eyes, and then went back to his bread. Catherine thought about it. She thought about the plain coat and the unmarked carriage, and the 2 children sitting on a bench in the inn yard at midnight without a nursemaid or a footman in sight. She thought about the way he had looked, horizontal, unguarded, like a man who had been going somewhere alone that he did not want anyone to know about. "I see," she said. "There will need to be—" Bingham began. "There does not need to be anything yet," Catherine said. "Not until he is awake to choose what there needs to be." She looked at him steadily. "He came here in plain dress and without announcing himself. Until he is conscious and can make decisions for himself, we will say nothing to the village about who he is. Are we agreed?" Bingham studied her for a moment. Then he said, "We are agreed," and went back to the bedroom. Somewhere in London, 2 months earlier, in a Mayfair drawing room that cost more per year than Catherine's stipend would earn in 3 lifetimes, a man named Sir Lucian Garth had been sitting across a desk from the Duke of Marchmont. He was the Duke's oldest friend. They had been at Oxford together. He had stood at the Duke's side through 15 years of trust and difficulty, and through the winter, 2 years ago, when the Duke had shut himself away at Marchmont Park and not come to London for 4 months. Garth had always been there. He was smooth and Oxford-mannered, and financially practical in the way that intelligent men sometimes are when they have decided that practicality is a virtue. He had placed a set of papers on the desk. "The diamonds," he said, "Eleanor's wedding set, and the family pieces she brought with her." He spoke with the practised gentleness of a man who had rehearsed the exact tone. "They are sitting in the estate vault doing nothing. The children's futures are not fixed. The trust is underfunded. It seems wasteful." "No," the Duke said. Garth looked at him. "No," the Duke said again. He did not raise his voice. He did not explain further. He closed the papers. Garth said he would let the matter sit. He had not intended to let the matter sit. Back in the cottage, Catherine was counting supplies. The stipend would not stretch past November without supplementing. It never did. The parish goodwill was reliable but not unconditional, and she had spent 5 years being careful not to ask for more than the charter allowed. She had now 2 additional mouths to feed and 1 large man to keep warm and medicated, and she had done this with no one's permission and no way of undoing it. The village would know a carriage had stopped at her cottage. It already did. This was Tipton St. Mary, and information moved with the consistency of water finding low ground. By morning, it would be embellished. By the day after that, it would be settled into the village's understanding of who she was, the jilted woman, and now apparently the kind of woman who brought men home from the road. The stipend would not stretch past November. The village was already watching. The man in her bedroom was too weak to move. She had made the only decision she could, and she could not unmake it. She went back to the bedroom to check the binding, and she did not look at the window, and she did not think about what any of it would cost her. She was very good by now, at not looking at things she could not change. He was a difficult patient in the specific way of powerful men rendered helpless. He was not conscious, not properly for most of the first 3 days. But he was not absent either. When the fever spiked on the second afternoon, she had known it would. She had prepared for it. She had the bark compound ready before the first shiver. He came back to himself briefly, long enough to register that he was in a room he did not recognize with a woman he did not know, doing something purposeful to his ribs, and his first instinct was to sit up. "No," Catherine said, and pressed his shoulder back to the pillow with both hands. He looked at her with grey eyes that were far clearer than they had any right to be in a man running a fever. She had the distinct impression that he was accustomed to people who moved when he looked at them that way. She did not move. "Your rib," she said, as if explaining something to a student who had not read ahead, "is displaced. If you sit up before I say you may, you will puncture your own lung and the evening will become considerably worse for both of us." She adjusted the binding. "You have a fever, but it is early and it is manageable. Your children are in the next room, they are well." He did not speak. He looked at her for another long moment, and then some decision happened somewhere behind his eyes, and he lay back. She worked. He watched her work with a kind of unblinking attention that would have been disconcerting from anyone else. His breathing was better already. The fever was breaking the way fevers do when they are caught in the first 12 hours. But he was still in the particular grey zone between ill and recovered, that uncomfortable territory where the body has stopped getting worse, but has not yet decided to get better. She changed the binding. She gave him the willow bark in water and waited until she was sure he had kept it down. She checked his temperature with her palm on his forehead, clinical, impersonal, and recorded what she found in the small notebook she had been keeping since the first night. "Your Grace," she said, because she could see from the shift in his expression that Bingham had been in, and the information was no longer contained. "I do not intend to make anything of this. I intend to keep you alive. When you are well enough to leave, you will leave, and I will go back to being the schoolmistress. That is all." He said nothing. She closed her notebook and went back to the kitchen. Over those first 3 days, she learned the shape of him by inference and necessity, the way you learn a patient you cannot yet properly see. He was a man who asked about his children before he asked about himself. That was day one. He was a man who said please when she brought the bark and thank you when the fever broke, both in exactly the register of a man who has been taught that civility is not submission. Day two. He was a man who looked at the ceiling in the small hours when he thought she was not watching, not sleeping, simply looking at the ceiling with an expression she recognized, the look of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long that they have forgotten what it would feel like to put it down. She recognized it because she had worn it herself for 5 years. She did not say so. On the fourth morning, Charlotte laughed. Catherine was coming down the short hallway with the basin when she heard it. Not a polite, cautious sound, but a real laugh, the kind that starts somewhere unexpected and arrives before you can stop it. She slowed. Charlotte was sitting on the floor by the bed with her back against the bed frame, reading aloud from one of Catherine's schoolbooks, a natural history text, which Catherine had left out the previous evening because the girl had looked as though she needed something purposeful to do. She was reading a passage about hedgehogs, and she had apparently reached the part about their winter habits, which Henry, planted in the doorway to the kitchen, had just repeated back to her in the tone of a person conducting a formal inquiry. Charlotte had laughed at it, genuinely, helplessly, the way children laugh when something reaches them before their guard is up. Catherine stopped in the hallway. She could see the bed from where she was standing. James Alderton, Duke of Marchmont, was awake. He was not all the way upright. She had forbidden that, and it appeared he was taking the prohibition seriously, but he was propped slightly on his elbow looking at Charlotte on the floor. He had the expression of a man who has been given something he was not prepared to receive. It was not, Catherine thought, the look of a man who heard his children laugh every day. Then he looked up and found her in the doorway. She had the basin. She was standing in her kitchen doorway, in her second-best dress, with her hair not quite properly pinned because it was 8 in the morning and she had been up since 5, and there was absolutely nothing composed or impressive about her. She was simply there. He looked at her. Catherine had been looked at, in 5 years, primarily as a fixture, as the schoolmistress, as the useful woman by the church. She had grown accustomed to being seen the way furniture is seen, registered, noted, and then ceased to be noticed. This was not that. She did not know what it was. She filed it away for later, the way she filed things she did not yet understand. And she walked into the room and set the basin down and said, "You slept through the night without fever. That is good." "Yes," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but it was, she noticed, exactly the voice she would have expected. Steady and deep and carrying the particular quality of someone who was accustomed to being the person in a room who did not need to speak loudly to be heard. Henry appeared in the doorway behind her. "Father," he announced, "Miss Lyle has hedgehogs in her books." There was a pause. "Does she?" the Duke said. "Several," Henry said, with great satisfaction, and disappeared. Charlotte, on the floor, looked up at her father with an expression of careful, hopeful assessment. Catherine saw James look at his daughter. Really look at her, the look you give a child when you are checking whether they are all right, all the way to the bottom, and something in his face softened by a degree so small you would have missed it if you had not been watching. Catherine picked up the basin and went back to the kitchen. She thought about it for the rest of the morning, the specific way he had looked at Charlotte, then at her, the way the room had shifted the instant she came through the door, not just because she had come in, but because he had looked at her before she came in, and he had been watching the doorway. She did not know what to do with any of that. So she made tea and she graded the copybooks she was 2 days behind on, and she told herself that a man looking at a woman across a room was not remarkable, and she mostly believed it. The cottage had taken on a new shape without her entirely deciding it should. Charlotte had quietly commandeered the chair nearest the fire for reading, and Henry had, with no discussion, adopted the hearthrug as his territory. The Duke's travelling coat had been brushed and hung on the peg by the door. Someone, Charlotte, Catherine suspected, had arranged the nurse bag by the wall in an orderly manner that suggested the contents had been inventoried and found acceptable. The village, Catherine knew, was already talking. She could feel it the way you feel weather coming, in the quality of the silence when she walked past the draper's window, in the way Mrs. Hargrove from the lane above had said good morning with that particular careful pleasantness that meant there would be a question at the end of it eventually. The stipend would not stretch past November at the best of times. She was now feeding 3 additional people on it. She looked at the door of her bedroom. She looked at her kitchen. She looked at the copybooks on the table and the herbs above the mantel, and the chair that Charlotte was sitting in with her dark head bent over the hedgehog book. She had done the only thing she could. She could not undo it. Whatever it cost her, it would cost her. By the 5th day, they had settled into something that resembled, uneasily, a household. The charity school occupied Catherine from 7 until noon. She taught through the wall, essentially, with the door between the schoolroom and the kitchen propped open so she could hear if anything happened. The children from the village came and went. Charlotte, who had apparently decided that Catherine's schoolroom was a resource worth making use of, took to sitting in the back row during the afternoon grammar sessions with a posture of complete innocence that did not deceive anyone. Henry had discovered the hedgehog nests in the vegetable garden and reported on them daily. James Alderton was upright by the 5th day, which was earlier than Catherine would have recommended, but she had learned by then that the Duke of Marchmont's relationship with her medical recommendations was that of a man who considered them seriously and then did what he intended to do anyway. He was in the kitchen chair when she came in from teaching at noon, drinking tea with the careful movements of a man whose ribs were explaining themselves to him with every breath, and he looked at her with those clear grey eyes and said, "Good morning," as if he had been there all along. "Your ribs," Catherine said. "Are fine," he said. "They are not fine," she said. "They are healing, which is not the same thing." "They are fine," he said, without particular emphasis, and the extraordinary thing was that there was no hostility in it. He simply believed it and was stating it. He was, she understood, a man who was accustomed to being disagreed with only by people who had stakes in the disagreement, and her stake was medical, and therefore to him, separate from the disagreement itself. She found this, against all reason, somewhat entertaining. She made her own tea and did not say anything more about his ribs. The meals were the most telling part of it. She cooked what she cooked, simple things, stretched carefully across 4 people instead of 1, and he ate what she put in front of him without comment or comparison, and the children ate beside him, And sometimes Charlotte talked, and sometimes Henry talked, and sometimes, in the particular silence that falls in a room where people are actually comfortable, nobody talked at all. It was the most people Catherine's kitchen had held in 5 years. She was not, she noticed, sorry about it. They talked for the first time properly on the afternoon of the 5th day. Charlotte and Henry were in the schoolroom with a set of arithmetic problems that Catherine had assigned with deliberate difficulty, which bought her at minimum 30 minutes. James was at the table with one of her father's books open in front of him. He had moved to it himself, she had not suggested it, and she was measuring out the evening's bark compound at the kitchen shelf. "You learned medicine from the texts," he said. It was not quite a question. "My father attended Dr. Pelling's lectures in London and took detailed notes," Catherine said. "I read them when I was 16. Then I read everything else in the shelf in order. And practised on the parish. There are a great many things to practice on in a rural parish," she said. "Fevers, breaks, dislocations, children who fall out of trees, men who get in the way of farm equipment." She paused. "Ribs." He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you a considerable debt," he said. "You owe me nothing," Catherine said. She said it without warmth or coldness, simply as a fact. "I stopped a runaway carriage. That is not a service I rendered for payment." Nevertheless nothing. You are alive and your children are well. That is the complete accounting." She turned to find him looking at her with an expression she could not immediately name. It was not the expression he had worn at the inn, when she had overridden the innkeeper. It was not the expression from the morning with the basin. It was something quieter than those. Something that had more time in it. She would think about it later, the way she thought about things she did not yet have a category for. He thought about her. The Duke of Marchmont had not, in 5 years, thought about a woman the way he was thinking about Catherine Lyle. He was aware of this with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable. She was not beautiful in the way that women were beautiful in his world. She was something more specific than that, more precise. She had brown hair that escaped its pins by afternoon, and grey eyes that registered everything with the calm attention of someone who has been keeping their own counsel for a very long time. She moved through her 2-room cottage with the efficiency of someone who had stopped performing domesticity and simply practiced it, and she talked to him as though he were a man, not a title. He could not remember the last time someone had talked to him as though he were simply a man. He looked at his father's book and thought about that, and then, with the discipline of someone who had spent 5 years training himself not to think certain things, he closed the thought and went back to reading. Bingham came on the 6th day to examine the wound. He was thorough and professional, and he asked Catherine the questions he would have asked a colleague. Not as a courtesy, Catherine noted, but as someone who had revised his assessment of what kind of knowledge he was consulting. She answered in kind. They went through the progression, the displacement, the fever cycle, the tissue response, the current binding pressure, the expected timeline to full stability. James was in the kitchen doorway when they came out. He had been there for some time. He had the expression of a man who was pretending to be interested in the middle distance. Bingham looked at him. "Your rib should be fully stable in another 8 days, Bingham said. Miss Lyle's treatment in the first 24 hours was the reason you still have the use of your lung." He said it the way he said medical facts, as a simple accounting of what was true. The displacement was considerable. Without the binding at the inn and the fever regimen by morning, the chest cavity would have been compromised by day 2. He collected his bag. "Good day, Your Grace. Miss Lyle." He left. James was quiet. Catherine said, "He is a good apothecary. He says what is accurate." "I know what he said was accurate," James said. He looked at her. "I am trying to decide how a schoolmistress in a village 12 miles from any proper physician knows the elder root application for a displaced rib." "I told you, my father's texts." "You knew it at the inn yard, before you had read anything." "I knew it from reading," Catherine said, "which I had done beforehand." He was still looking at her. There was something different in it now. Not the cool assessment she had learned to read in him, but something that was paying closer attention. "You are wasted here," he said, not as a compliment, as an observation. The words landed differently than she expected. She felt the specific sting of recognition, not because it was wrong, but because it was not a thing she had let herself think, and he had just said it plainly, and she was not sure whether to be grateful or angry. "I am exactly where I am," she said, and went back to the kitchen. He came on the 7th day. Catherine was in the schoolroom when she heard the knock. She heard it twice before she moved. The second knock came faster than the first, with the particular precision of a man who is certain he will be answered. She came through the kitchen and found James already at the door. He was not fully strong. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the slight forward lean that meant his ribs were not offering their full cooperation. But he was upright, and he had placed himself in the doorway with a very clear intention of remaining there, and the man on the step was talking. She had not seen Sir Lucian Garth before. She saw him now, a man of about 40 with an Oxford haircut and a beautifully tailored coat and an expression of practised warm concern that she found, on instinct, unpersuasive. He was looking at James with the easy confidence of a friend who has come a long way to help and expects to be welcomed. "James," he said, "good God, I've been in a state. When you didn't arrive—" "You found me," James said. "Eventually. The village has been talking." His eyes moved past James, to the cottage, to Catherine standing in the kitchen. She watched him register her, not suspiciously, not pointedly, methodically, the way a man catalogues something he intends to retrieve later. "Miss Lyle's household is closed to visitors," James said. There was a pause. Garth smiled. "I only want to see that you're well. Surely." "I am well," James said. "Thank you for coming." He was already moving to close the door. "I will write when I'm in London." The door closed. Garth stood on the step for a moment. Catherine could not see his expression. She could see his stillness. Then she heard his footsteps moving away down the path, unhurried. She looked at James. He was leaning against the door frame with an effort of will that was visible only because she had learned, over 7 days, the difference between his regular stillness and the stillness of controlled pain. "Sit down," she said. "I am perfectly—" "Your Grace," she said. He sat down. Catherine did not say anything else about it. She got the bark compound and set it on the table, and he drank it without argument, which was how she knew the encounter had cost him more than he intended to show. She thought about the way Garth had looked at her, the way his eyes had moved, not to her face but to the cottage, to the children's shoes by the wall, to the inventory of her life. She thought about the thin smile she had not been able to see but had somehow felt. She did not like it. That evening, when the children were asleep, Catherine came down the hallway and found the schoolroom door open. James was standing at the window. He was looking at the lane. The last of the October light had turned everything the colour of old paper, and the lane stretched away between the hedgerows the way it had on the evening a week ago, when she had heard the bells and stepped into the middle of it. He was very still. He was not looking at the lane in the way you look at a landscape. He was looking at a specific point, as if the lane itself contained something he needed to understand. She did not go in. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment, and she felt something she could not name, something that sat between the recognized ache of loneliness and something newer, something that was not about her at all. He was carrying something. He had been carrying it since the first night, when she had watched him look at the ceiling in the dark. She did not know what it was. She did not ask. She withdrew before he turned. 2 days later, Charlotte came to the kitchen table with something in her hands. It was a small carved bird, wooden, unpainted, smooth and neat, about the length of Charlotte's palm. A wren, Catherine thought, by the shape of the tail and the compact body. Someone had made it with considerable care. "Father gave it to me to keep," Charlotte said. She looked at it. She looked at Catherine. He said it was for keeping safe. Catherine looked at the wren. She picked it up for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the careful, deliberate weight of something made to last. Then she set it down in front of Charlotte. "Then you had better keep it safe," she said. She went back to the tea kettle. She felt the stakes settle that evening, with the quiet certainty of a door closing on a room that you know you will not leave in the same way you entered. She did not name what she felt. She had grown too careful for that. But she knew, as she had always known when something important was true, that things had become something other than what they had been, and she was not going to be able to go back to not knowing it. He had not gone through his coat until the 9th day. There had not been a reason to. He had been in no state to go anywhere, and going through pockets requires a certain presence of mind that the fever and the binding had made unavailable. On the 9th morning he was dressed and moving with something approaching his normal authority, and he needed to know how much coin was in the coat before he could begin thinking practically about what came next. He went through the outside pockets first, then the inside pocket. He found it folded behind his pocketbook. a single sheet of paper folded twice, with the Tattersall's letterhead at the top. He unfolded it. He read it once. He read it again. The auction house had sold 3 lots under the authorization of Sir Lucian Garth acting as agent. The Eleanor Alderton diamond set, the wedding pieces, the matched earrings, and the collar, and the engagement ring he had chosen himself in the summer of 1818, the 3 loose stones from the Marchmont estate collection, the sapphire and pearl parure that had come to Eleanor from her mother, sold, lot numbers assigned, hammer prices noted in the careful column to the right. The date at the top of the invoice was the 15th of October. The carriage accident had been the 16th. Garth had come to the cottage on the 22nd and stood in the doorway and looked at him with the practised warmth of an old friend, and the diamonds had already been gone for a week. James stood in the bedroom of a 2-room village cottage and looked at the paper and felt something he had not felt in 5 years. Not grief this time, not the contained, managed grief he had been carrying since December of 1820, but something hotter and cleaner and infinitely more useful. He felt rage. The diamonds had been Eleanor's. He could trace each of them, the wedding set he had chosen, the pieces she had brought from her family, the stones his own mother had given them on the morning of the wedding. Eleanor had worn them once at the Marchmont Park autumn gathering in 1819, and he remembered the specific way the light had moved in the collar when she turned her head, and how she had laughed at something Charlotte's nurse had said, and how he had thought, with the simple certainty that a man in love does not yet know is precarious, that this was a life he intended to keep. She had been dead 14 months later. He had not opened the vault since the funeral. He had not been able to. He had locked the nursery wing, and he had locked the vault, and he had locked Eleanor's name inside himself, like a room he no longer had the right to enter, and he understood now, with the cold clarity of someone looking at a document, that he had thought this was a form of faithfulness, that not spending the money was loyalty, that the locked wing was grief properly observed. Garth had known this. Garth had known it for 5 years, and had understood it as an asset, as something that could be converted. He had been to the vault. He had gone in without authorization, and taken the pieces, and driven them to London, and presented them at auction, and received the payment, and then he had come to the cottage and said he was concerned. James looked at Garth's signature at the bottom of the page, the elegant, practised signature of a man who had been signing his name with confidence for 40 years. He thought, I will destroy you for this. Not in rage, the rage had settled fast, the way real anger does in the people who have learned to work with it. He thought it with the flat precision of a decision made and filed. He thought it also. She deserved better than this. Eleanor deserved better than to have her things sold by a man she had offered tea to in the drawing room. He folded the invoice and put it in his pocket. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment with the particular stillness of a man taking stock. Then he thought about the fair. The village fair was in 2 days. It was the kind of event where every person within a 5-mile radius appeared in the same space at the same time. It was, if he managed it correctly, a mechanism. The village magistrate would be there. The auction records were already in the hands of his solicitor in London, who had been asking questions on his behalf for 3 days. He had written the letter on the 6th morning, before anyone had come to the cottage door. He had the invoice. His solicitor had the backup. Garth would not expect it. Garth thought him contained, recovering in a village cottage, socially isolated with no resources to hand. That was the bet Garth had made. That bet was about to close. James put his hand in his coat pocket. The wren was there. He had put it there the morning Charlotte brought it back to him. She had kept it for 6 days and then placed it in his palm at breakfast without explanation, which meant she had understood something about it that he had not yet fully articulated to himself. He thought about Catherine Lyle standing in the doorway with the basin. He thought, there is a great deal I'm going to have to reckon with when this is finished. She found him in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a piece of paper in front of him, and an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the cold mask, not the recovering patience, but something flat and worked out, like a problem that had been solved to a conclusion that was not pleasant, but was settled. He looked up when she came in. He said, "Sit down." She sat. He slid the paper across the table. Catherine read it once. She read it again. She looked at the date. She looked at Garth's signature. She looked at the column of prices on the right and the description of items sold, and she understood, with the same clinical speed with which she understood a wound, exactly what she was reading and what it meant. She put it back on the table. She looked at him. "What do you intend to do with it?" she said. He had been waiting, she thought, for someone to ask a direct question without attaching any stake to the answer. She could see the slight shift in his expression, not softening exactly, but a recognition of the absence of agenda. She was asking because she was in the middle of it, and she had a right to know, and for no other reason. "The magistrate will be at the fair in 2 days," James said. "My solicitor has been in London looking at the auction record since the 6th. The invoice corroborates what he is already finding." He was precise and unhurried. "Garth will be at the fair. He has property 12 miles from here, and he attends it every year. I intend to have the magistrate meet me at the road before the fair opens." "And then?" "And then I intend to go to the fair with you," he said, "and to make it entirely clear to this village what I think of the past 9 days." Catherine looked at him. She understood what he meant. She understood what it would look like. The Duke of Marchmont walking into the Tipton St. Mary Fair beside the woman everyone in the village had been talking about all week. She understood what it would do to the talking. She felt something large and cautious move in her chest. She did not name it. "You do not have to do that," she said. "The magistrate and the invoice are sufficient." "Miss Lyle," he said, and there was something in his voice that was different from every other way he had spoken to her in 9 days. "I am aware of what I am required to do and what I am not required to do. I am telling you what I intend." A silence. "Very well," Catherine said. She stood up. "I have 3 dozen copybooks to grade." She went back to the schoolroom. She was aware that her hands were not entirely steady when she picked up the first book, and that it took her longer than usual to find the place. In the kitchen that evening, Henry found the invoice on the table where James had left it. He looked at it with great seriousness, and then put it back exactly as he had found it, which told Catherine, watching from the shelf, that he had understood it was important, and that this was his way of being trustworthy. She thought about Edmund Wallace, which she did more often in this cottage than she did anywhere else. Wallace had stood at the church door with a practised regret and said the circumstances had changed. He had known the accounts were empty before she had. He had known, she understood now with the clarity of 9 days of proximity to a different kind of man, that the inconvenience was hers to carry and not his. He had made a calculation, and the calculation had not included her. She had been a fixture in his plan until the plan became impractical, and then she had been a problem to be stepped around. She looked at the travelling coat on the peg. She thought about the invoice in it and the wren in the other pocket. She thought, these are 2 different kinds of men. She was not sure what to do with that either. She seemed lately to be collecting things she did not know what to do with. She fed Henry his dinner and listened to him describe the hedgehogs and thought about the fair in 2 days. The magistrate came the morning before the fair. He was a reasonable man named Colton, who had been performing the legal functions of Tipton St. Mary for 11 years, and he had the expression of someone who would rather be doing anything else but understood that the anonymous letter sitting in his office required a response. He removed his hat at the door and told Catherine, with the formal courtesy of a man reading from a prepared statement, that he had received a communication concerning the welfare of a notable person believed to be residing at this address, and that he was required to verify the situation was voluntary and above reproach. Catherine looked at him steadily. "His Grace is here voluntarily and in good health," she said. "He was injured in a carriage accident 10 days ago and has been recovering. Mr. Bingham of the High Street has attended him throughout." She paused. "Is there anything else you need to know?" "No, Miss Lyle, thank you." "Good day, Mr. Colton." She closed the door. James was in the kitchen. He had been listening from the moment the knock came. She could see it in the way he was standing, not tense exactly, but with his attention fully collected, the expression of a man sorting through a situation very quickly. "The letter was anonymous," Catherine said. "Yes," James said. "Garth?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "He does not want me at the fair tomorrow. He has had 9 days to understand that I did not leave without reason, and he has had 3 days to understand that I did not leave after he came to the door, and he has drawn the correct conclusion." He looked at the window. "He cannot stop the fair or the magistrate's preparation, but if he can get me moved from here before tomorrow morning, he creates enough legal ambiguity about my state of mind that the invoice becomes harder to act on quickly." Catherine thought about that. "He sent the magistrate to separate us," she said. "He sent the magistrate to move me." He looked at her then. "The letter named your cottage. Whatever he wrote it to create a problem for you, not for me. I can manage a magistrate's inquiry. You cannot manage what the village will do with an anonymous letter in a legal document." He was right. She knew it. The rage that moved through her was quiet and clean and entirely useless, which was the specific kind of rage she had learned to handle over 5 years of being a woman alone in a village that had decided she was a cautionary tale. "Where are you going?" she said. "The coaching inn," he said. "Tonight." Charlotte did not say anything when James told her. She pressed her lips together with an expression of 8-year-old composure that was exact and painful, and she nodded. Henry said, "But why can't you stay here?" "Because it is better for Miss Lyle if I do not," James said. He said it plainly and directly, the way he talked to his children, and Catherine was grateful for it in a way she would not have predicted. "But she doesn't mind," Henry said. He looked at Catherine. "Do you?" "I mind what is right," Catherine said, "which is what your father is doing." She looked at James. "I will pack the bark compound. You will still need it for another 3 days." "Miss Lyle, it is not optional," she said. "Take it." She packed it, and she brought it to the door, and she did not look at him while she did it. She was very good by now, at managing things that cost her while looking as though they did not cost her. She had had 5 years of practice. She was not going to undo that practice in front of 2 children and a duke. He took the compound. He paused at the door. She did not say, "Stay." She did not say any of the things that were sitting in her chest, pressing against her ribs with an insistence she had not been prepared for. She was Catherine Lyle, the useful schoolmistress. She asked no one for anything. She did not beg. She said, "I will see you at the fair." He said, "Yes." He left. Charlotte went to the bedroom without being asked and made the bed with the precise, furious neatness of a child managing something difficult through industry. Henry sat on the hearthrug and looked at the door for a long time. Catherine graded copybooks until she had graded all 32 of them, which took until after 9 in the evening, and was, she recognised, excessive, but she did not know what else to do with her hands. The knock came at 10:30. She had not yet gone to bed. She was at the kitchen table with the lamp low, not reading, simply sitting in the way you sit when you have worked through everything available and have arrived at the thing you were trying to avoid arriving at. She had been thinking, with a precision she had not applied to herself in 5 years, about what was going to happen tomorrow, about the fair, about what it would look like, about the specific physics of standing beside someone in a public space, and what standing beside them would mean to a village that had decided, years ago, what it meant when you were near a man. She opened the door. James was there. He had his coat on. He did not have the compound. He had left it at the inn. "I am not staying," he said. "I need—" He stopped. She stepped back from the door to let him in. He came in and stood in the kitchen and looked around the room as if orienting himself, and she had the impression he had been standing at the inn for the past 2 hours trying to talk himself out of coming here, and had failed. "The schoolroom," he said. "May I?" She nodded. She followed him into the schoolroom, and he stood at the window again, the same window, the lane, the same dark shape below, and she sat on the edge of the teaching table and waited. The silence had a different quality from the silences of the past 10 days. It was not the silence of a patient conserving energy. It was the silence of a man about to say something he had not said to anyone. She did not feel it. "Her name was Eleanor," he said. His voice was steady. It was steady in the particular way that things are steady when they have been held still by a great deal of force for a very long time. "She died in December of 1820, he said. "At Marchmont Park. It was a confinement. The child was lost too, a son. They could not reach him in time." He paused. "I have not said her name aloud in 5 years." Catherine said nothing. She held very still. "I thought—" He stopped. He started again. "I thought it was a form of faithfulness. I thought that if I kept everything as it was, the wing locked, the vault locked, her name locked, that was the right thing. That it was what she deserved." His voice was not quite steady anymore. "I understand that this was not correct, but I did not know how to do it differently." He turned from the window. She could see his face in the lamplight from the kitchen. She had seen him in many states over 10 days, but she had not seen this. The face he wore when the cold mask was entirely gone, when there was nothing between what he felt and the air in the room. He looked, she thought, very like Charlotte when Charlotte had decided not to cry. The controlled surface and the visible effort and the particular dignity of someone choosing to stay upright. She thought about Eleanor, whose name she had just heard for the first time. She thought about the locked nursery wing and the vault and 5 years of keeping everything as it had been. She thought about what it costs a person to maintain something like that for 5 years. She thought about what it had cost him to say the name. She got up from the table. She crossed the room and she sat down beside him on the window seat, which was barely wide enough for 2 adults, and she put her hand over his. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would be better than silence. She had learned this in her father's parish, that sometimes what a person needs is not to be answered, but to have someone stay in the room with them while they carry the thing they are carrying, and so she stayed. He looked at her hand on his for a long moment. Then he said, "I am going to need to say her name more often." "Yes," Catherine said. "I think so." Another silence. This one was different, lighter, which was strange given everything, but it was. Something had come out of the room that had been taking up space in it. "I should go," he said. "You should go," she agreed. Neither of them moved. He looked at the lane out the window. He said, "What happened to you?" "With Wallace." "He left," she said. "That is the whole of it." "It is not the whole of it." "No," she said, "but it is the part I am finished carrying." She looked at the lane too. "I have been very careful these past 5 years, not to want more than what I had. I thought it was the same as being sensible." She paused. "I think it may have been the same as being afraid." He looked at her. "I think you are the least afraid person I have met in a considerable time," he said. "Then you have not been looking closely," she said. They sat for another few minutes in the narrow window seat, with the October lane below them, and the lamp in the kitchen throwing a yellow rectangle across the schoolroom floor. Then he stood. He reached into his coat pocket. He took out the wren and set it on the windowsill. "I will come to the cottage in the morning," he said. "We will go to the fair together. Will you be ready?" "I will be ready," Catherine said. He left. She sat on the window seat for a long time after he went, with the carved wren on the sill, and her hand in her lap still warm from where his hand had been, and she thought, "All right, whatever comes next. All right." In the morning she put on her best dress. It was dark blue wool, cut plainly without ornament. It was the dress she wore when she needed the village to see her as something other than the schoolmistress who mended her own gloves, and she put it on with the deliberateness of someone going into battle. She took the wren from the windowsill and put it in her pocket. She did not know why. It seemed right. James was at the cottage door at 9. He had found his way to a freshly pressed coat from somewhere, the inn perhaps, and he looked, for the first time since the lane, entirely himself. The cold mask was on. The shoulders were back. The Duke of Marchmont was in the posture and the bearing. His eyes found her immediately and the mask did not move, but something in the grey of them was different from the ordinary grey. "Ready?" he said. "Ready?" she said. Charlotte took Henry's hand and they walked to the fair. The fair was everything Tipton St. Mary did once a year, and it was doing all of it at once. The common behind St. Bartholomew's was full, the livestock pens along the south wall, the cordial sellers and their striped awnings, the rows of craft stalls, the crowd of faces that Catherine had known for 5 years. All of them were there. The baker and his wife, the schoolchildren with their parents, Mr. Colton the magistrate, visible near the road entrance in his good coat, with 2 constables she had not seen in the village before standing a careful distance behind him. Catherine walked in beside James and felt the village notice. She had expected it. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything difficult, by knowing it was coming and deciding in advance that she would not flinch. But she had not quite prepared for the specific quality of it, the way heads turned and then turned back and then turned again, the whispered exchange between Mrs. Crane and Mrs. Pell near the cheese stall, the way the noise of the fair dropped a fraction in the immediate area where they walked and then rose again behind them. Henry was looking at the livestock with total absorption. Charlotte walked straight with her chin up. She was, Catherine thought, very like her father. James walked as if he did not notice any of it, which meant he noticed all of it. Edmund Wallace was at the cordial stand. Catherine saw him the moment they arrived. It was not a large fair, and Wallace was the kind of man who positioned himself where he could be seen. He was with a friend from the law practice, a man Catherine did not know well, and they were drinking something from small cups and talking with the ease of 2 men who had not had a difficult morning. Wallace saw her a moment later. She watched him see her, watched him take in James beside her, watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the one she recognized, the cost-benefit arithmetic that was, she understood now, the thing that had always operated in him, and that she had once mistaken for character. He turned back to his companion and said something. Catherine felt it, felt the words leave his mouth and begin moving toward her through the crowd, the way it always moved in Tipton St. Mary. From mouth to ear to another mouth, faster than walking, faster than a polite interval. She had 10 minutes, she estimated, before it arrived. She was right. It was 12. Mrs. Hargrove came from the direction of the craft stalls, with the deliberateness of a woman who has decided something and is carrying out the decision before she can reconsider it. She was not a cruel woman. Catherine had known her for 5 years. She was a practical woman who believed in the social order of Tipton St. Mary and believed further that maintaining it was a form of community service. She stopped in front of Catherine with the full attention of a woman who was used to being listened to. "Miss Lyle," she said, in the clear, carrying voice of a person not trying to be private, "I'm going to ask you something directly because I think it is better to ask directly than to let the village speculate, and the village is speculating rather actively." She glanced briefly at James. "Are you going to follow Wallace's example and improve your circumstances through a gentleman's purse? Because I think you deserve better than to be—" "No," Catherine said. Mrs. Hargrove blinked. Catherine said it again. "No." She looked directly at the woman in front of her, and she felt, with a cold and absolute clarity, every one of the 5 years that had brought her to this moment. The church door, the empty accounts, the 32 copybooks, the lane and the bridle and the mud and the man on the carriage floor. "I have not improved my circumstances," she said. "My circumstances are identical to what they were 12 days ago. I am the village schoolmistress. I stopped a runaway carriage with my bare hands because there were 2 children inside it and no one else was in the road. I brought the injured man to my cottage because Mr. Bingham determined he could not be moved safely, and I nursed him because I had the training to do it, and the situation required it." She paused. "That is what happened. All of it. I am not embarrassed by any of it, and I will not pretend to be." There was a silence. The crowd that had been pretending not to listen was no longer pretending. Mr. Bingham stepped out of it. He was not a dramatic man. He had the deliberate pace of someone whose authority came from precision rather than theatre, and he placed himself beside Catherine with the matter-of-fact positioning of a man giving evidence. "I can speak to the medical facts," he said, to no one in particular, in the voice he used for professional testimony. "The Duke of Marchmont presented at Miss Lyle's cottage with a displaced rib and an early-stage chest fever. The rib displacement was significant, Category 3 by the Pelling classification. A Category 3 displacement, if not bound correctly within the first 8 hours, carries a high probability of lung puncture and subsequent fatal collapse." He paused. "Miss Lyle had the wound properly bound before I arrived on the second morning. She had identified the fever risk and begun the bark regimen at first light on day 2. Without the treatment she administered in the first 24 hours, His Grace would not have survived to reach a physician." Another pause. "I am stating this as a professional observation, not a social one. Good morning." He stepped back into the crowd. The fair had gone almost entirely quiet in the immediate area. Catherine felt the weight of the silence and kept her shoulders back and her chin level. She felt something she had not felt in 5 years. Not triumph, not vindication, but the simpler and more fundamental sensation of being correctly seen. She felt it in her chest, in her ribs, in the specific place where 5 years of careful smallness had been living, and she felt it dissolve. Then James moved. He took her arm. He did it the way a man makes a formal claim, not quickly, not tentatively, but with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of someone who has decided something and is now executing it in public. He took her arm and placed it in his, and turned to face the fair. Then he looked across the crowd to the cordial stand. "Wallace," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of a man who had never, in his adult life, needed to raise it to be heard. Edmund Wallace turned. Catherine watched him take in James, watched the expression on his face run through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then the specific kind of stillness that comes when the calculation has come back unfavourable. "You said something about this woman," James said, "that I believe you meant to be within her hearing. I'm telling you, in front of anyone who would like to listen, that you were wrong about what you said and wrong about what you implied, and that it is not the first time you have been wrong about her at this woman's expense." He paused. "You may say what you like in response." Wallace said nothing. He looked at Catherine. He looked at James. He looked at the faces of Tipton. St. Mary turned toward him, waiting. He put down his cup. He walked away from the cordial stand. He kept walking until he was through the fair entrance and gone. The fair let out a breath. James turned to Catherine. "This woman," he said, and his voice was not performing for the crowd now. It was simply the truth said clearly in a public space, "is my wife." The words went through the fair like a stone through still water. A ring of silence, then the noise spreading outward, not hostile noise, not surprised noise exactly, but the specific sound of a village revising itself all at once. Mrs. Hargrove stepped back. Catherine felt tears sting her eyes and was briefly angry at herself for it, and then decided she did not care. She kept her chin up. She was Catherine Lyle, the jilted schoolmistress, the woman who stopped horses and graded 32 copybooks by lamplight, and held herself together for 5 years without asking anyone for help, and she was not going to collapse now. She was also apparently going to cry in public, which she had told herself she would never do. She cried for exactly 4 seconds. Then she stopped, because James was looking at her, and the crowd was watching, and she had more dignity than that, and she had always had more dignity than that. "Thank you," she said, which was an inadequate thing to say, and the only one available. "Come," he said. On the road below the fair entrance, Mr. Colton the magistrate was moving toward a man in an Oxford coat who had just realised too late that the morning had developed in a direction he had not prepared for. The invoice was already in Colton's coat pocket. Garth saw the magistrate coming from 30 yards. Catherine watched him see it. She watched the smooth surface of the man, the practised calm, the Oxford manner, the 15 years of an expression that said he was always the most reasonable person in a room, develop the first crack she had seen in it. It was small. She would have missed it if she had not been watching precisely. "Sir Lucian Garth," Mr. Colton said, "I am holding a warrant from the county court for your arrest on charges of forgery and the unauthorised disposal of property belonging to the Alderton estate." He produced a document. "I will ask you to come with me." Garth looked at James. James looked back. There were 15 seconds in which Garth understood in sequence the invoice, the solicitor's inquiry in London, the 9 days in the cottage, the reason James had not left when Garth had sent the letter, and the fact that the mechanism had been running for days before Garth had understood it was running at all. He said, "I can explain." "You may explain to the court at Ashbourne," Colton said. He nodded to the constables. They took Garth by the arms with the efficiency of men doing something they have prepared for, and he went without further argument because there was nothing further to argue. And the crowd of the Tipton St. Mary Fair watched Sir Lucian Garth, a man with an Oxford coat and a Mayfair house and a 15-year friendship with the Duke of Marchmont, be walked to the waiting constable's carriage in the road. Charlotte, standing beside Catherine with Henry's hand in hers, watched it happen with the expression of a child filing something carefully away. "Good," she said, quietly and precisely, to no one in particular. Henry nodded with great authority. He came to the garden the next morning. Catherine was cutting back the last of the autumn roses, a task she did every year at this time, practical and unremarkable, when she heard the gate. She straightened. James walked across the small garden and stopped in front of her, and she could see immediately that whatever he had come to say he had already decided on, probably at the inn, probably before dawn, probably while standing at a window the way he stood at windows when he was working something out. He reached into his coat pocket. He held out the carved wren. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You put it on the window-sill," she said. "I gave it back to Charlotte to keep," he said. "She gave it back to me this morning." He paused. "She said she thought it was time." Catherine looked at the wren in his palm. She had run the charity school her father had left her. She had graded the copybooks. She had stepped into the road when there was no one else in it, and she had held on, and the horse had stopped. She had done all of it alone, and she had done it without asking anyone for help or pity, or any of the things she had told herself for 5 years that she did not need. She had, she understood now, been afraid. She had been afraid for 5 years. She was afraid right now, as a matter of fact, with a sharp and specific fear that had nothing to do with horses or fevers or public questioning at a village fair. She was afraid of what came next, of wanting something this specific, of being a woman who could stop a carriage with her bare hands and still not be sure she could do this. James, watching her face, said, "I should get on my knee." "Your ribs are nearly healed," he said. "They are not nearly." "Catherine," he said. He went on his knee. He went on it carefully because his ribs did, in fact, still complain, and she saw the slight intake of breath, and she decided that if she cried again right now, she was simply going to accept it as a feature of this day and move on. He held the wren up to her. She felt joy, not the managed, cautious, defended approximation of contentment she had been living inside for 5 years. Joy, the actual thing, large and ungovernable, and not interested in being sensible. "I should like to be asked," she said, because it was important, because she had not been asked 5 years ago, because she was owed the asking. He looked at her. He asked. She took the wren out of his palm. She took his hand. She said yes. He stayed on his knee for another moment, whether from the ribs or from the relief she could not tell, and then he stood and she was crying again, and she had, she decided, simply lost all control of the situation, which was unprecedented, and which she was prepared to live with. "Your ribs," she said, her voice not entirely steady. "I know," he said. "Sit down," she said. "Not quite yet," he said, and he put his other hand over hers around the wren, and they stood in the October garden with a pale morning light on the last of the roses, and it was, in the end, exactly as simple as that. They were married on a Tuesday in November in the small chapel of St. Bartholomew's, with 4 candles and 2 children, and Mr. Bingham, who stood as witness with the same dry precision he brought to everything, and who signed the register in his apothecary's hand without the faintest suggestion that any of it was remarkable. Charlotte wore her best dress and stood beside Catherine with the posture of someone performing an important duty with complete seriousness, which was exactly right. Henry wore his suit and stood beside his father and fell asleep against James's arm during the reading, and was gently stabilized without interruption, which was also exactly right. Catherine wore ivory wool and no jewellery except the small pearl ring that had been Eleanor's engagement ring, and was now hers. She had asked for it specifically when James had offered her the choice, not because it was the most valuable thing in the vault, but because it seemed right to wear something that had meant something once and could mean something again. And when she said this to James, she watched something move in his face, that she understood without needing to name. He said Eleanor's name during the ceremony. Not in the vows, but after, quietly, to Catherine alone, which was his way of bringing one thing into the same room as the other thing, the old love and the new one, and making sure they could stand together. They could. The door of St. Bartholomew's closed behind them into the November morning, and that evening, in the room at Marchmont Park that would be hers, the candle went out and the curtains were drawn, and whatever happened next was exactly and entirely their own business. Here is what happened afterward, which the audience deserves to know in full. Sir Lucian Garth was tried at the county assizes at Ashbourne in December. The charge was forgery. He had signed James's name on the authorization form for the Tattersall sale, which was criminal, and had represented himself as an authorized agent of the estate, which was also criminal. The auction records and the invoice were produced in evidence. He was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 14 years' transportation. He arrived in New South Wales the following spring. He did not return. The Tattersall's auction was nullified by court order. Eleanor's diamonds were recovered and returned to Marchmont Park. The sapphire and pearl parure that had come from Eleanor's mother was found intact and placed back in the vault. The Marchmont family ring was cleaned and put in its case in the nursery, where Charlotte had asked for it to be kept. Garth's Mayfair house was seized against the debts he had contracted in the course of the scheme. His former friends in London found other things to talk about within a fortnight. No one sent a letter of inquiry. Edmund Wallace lost his most lucrative client by Christmas. It happened quietly, through the mechanism of a discreet conversation between James's solicitor and the client in question, and it happened without fanfare or announcement, which made it worse than fanfare would have. By Michaelmas of the following year, the village of Tipton St. Mary had, without discussion or particular intent, simply stopped acknowledging him when he walked past. He was not driven out. He was made invisible, which was, all things considered, the correct penalty. Mrs. Hargrove had the grace, 3 weeks after the fair, to come to the school and leave a parcel of books for the charity pupils, without asking to be thanked for it. Catherine accepted them. That was all. It was, in its way, sufficient. 1 year later, Marchmont Park was a different house. The difference was not architectural. The stone was the same stone and the park was the same park, and the long gallery still ran from east to west with the same light in the afternoons. But the nursery wing was open. There was a fire in it every morning. The sound of it, small feet on the boards, a nurse's voice, the particular high register of a child who is not yet talking but who is making the preliminary investigations, came down the corridor and into the rooms where people lived, and no one closed a door against it. The carved wren was on the nursery mantelpiece. Catherine had put it there herself on the morning they moved the cradle in, and James had not said anything, but she had seen his face when he found it there, and that was enough. Charlotte was 14 months older than she had been on the lane, which meant she was 9 years old and had opinions about arithmetic, and had taken it upon herself to teach it to other people. She taught the lower forms at the Lisle Village School on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. That was what the endowment deed called it, in exactly those words. That was what the painted sign above the door called it, in letters 1.5 inches tall. She taught with the focused, slightly imperious patience of someone who has been well taught and intends to pass it on correctly. Henry was on a pony. He was always on the pony. The pony was a small, grey Welsh cob with an unflappable temperament, and the air of a creature that had made its peace with its circumstances, which Catherine thought showed considerable wisdom on the pony's part. Henry rode it around the South Field every afternoon, and narrated the experience to anyone who would listen, which in practice meant James, who listened with the complete seriousness that Henry required, and that Catherine had come to regard as one of the most unexpectedly moving things about the man she had married. She stood in her garden, the rose garden from the cottage, relocated to a corner of the Marchmont estate grounds on James's instruction and her surprised acceptance, and she looked at the house. The house was full. She thought about the 2-room cottage, the 32 copybooks graded by lamplight, the mended gloves, the empty accounts and the church door in the morning after her father's funeral, when the world had arranged itself into a shape she had not chosen. She thought about standing in the middle of the lane. She thought, yes, all right, this. James came out through the garden gate. He sat down beside her on the bench and said nothing for a while, which was one of the things she had learned about him, that he was a man who could sit beside you in silence in a way that felt like company rather than absence. Eleanor had taught him that, she supposed. She did not resent the teaching. Charlotte has decided, James said presently, that Henry is ready for long division. He is not ready for long division, Catherine said. I know, I told her. She said he would be by Thursday. Catherine looked at the house. She thought about the lane and the bells and the moment she had stepped into the middle of the road with no particular reason to believe it would work. She reached into the pocket of her dress and found the wren. She had taken it down from the mantelpiece that morning without entirely deciding to, and it had travelled with her all day, as it did sometimes, a small familiar weight. She turned it over in her hand. Grief may close a door, she thought, but a kind hand opens the longer one. She had been told, for 5 years, that she was a cautionary tale. She had believed it for most of those years, in the practical way you believe things when enough people behave as if they are true. She had made herself small and useful, and she had not asked for more than what she had, and she had called this being sensible. It was not, she understood now, being sensible. She put the wren back in her pocket. She thought of the bare hands on the bridle, the mud of the lane, the horse stopping. She thought, I did not let go. The village school bore her name. The nursery wing was open. The infant in the house was hers. The man sitting beside her had said Eleanor's name in the schoolroom with all the lights out, and she had stayed. And he had come back the next morning with a carved wren in his pocket and gone on his knee, and neither of them had let go. She had never been a cautionary tale. She had been waiting for the horse to stop.